The battle over the UAP Disclosure Act began on November 27 in the US Congress. An interview with a former FBI special agent on links between the Ukraine, Israel-Palestine and a false flag alien invasion, and ancient Akkadian texts, the Atra Hasis, reveals the agenda of an Anunnaki Lord, Prince Ea, who allegedly has arrived back in our solar system. Star Nation news about ET activities in our solar system. There's been an effort to remove eminent domain from the UAP Disclosure Act that will strengthen the hand of aerospace corporations. A retired Rear Admiral speaks out on the need for UFO transparency. Britain's Daily Mail reveals the role of the CIA in tracking UFOs and crash retrieval operations. Tucker Carlson speaks with Tim Burchett on who's behind the effort to water down the UAP Disclosure Act. Those and many other stories for this week's Week in Review.
You're listening to Exopolitics Today with Dr. Michael Salla, your source for the uncensored truth regarding the human, extraterrestrial, global, and political agenda. Click the like button and subscribe to this channel. And now, here's Dr. Michael Salla.
Well, welcome to Exopolitics Today, the Week in Review for December 2nd. It has been a really big week when it comes to the UAP Disclosure Act for 2023. The US Congress has various committees discussing the passage of the National Defense Authorization Act for 2024. And there's a reconciliation committee where they try to resolve different versions of the House of Representatives and the US Senate. Each of those have their own National Defense Authorization Act bills for 2024. And the Senate version includes the UAP Disclosure Act, whereas the House version did not have it. So this reconciliation committee, comprising leaders from the armed services committees and congressional leaders from both parties, are trying to resolve the different versions to come up with one single act, which will then be passed into law. So this is the battle that's happening right now. Which of these, which version and to what extent will the UAP Disclosure Act be passed? So let's go to my Twitter feed. And here's an article from November 25, and it is in the Liberation Times. And it gives a really nice summary of the different positions that are being contested. It's talking about the fate of the UAP Disclosure Act. Now, will it be watered down? Will it be removed altogether? Or will it be passed unaltered? So this article in Liberation Times, and remember, all the links that I cite and all the stories I cite are in my Twitter feed or X feed. And you can just go to twitter.com/Michael Salla, and it will take you to my feed and you can see all the links. So this is a story written by Christopher Sharp, and he gives a nice summary, a roundup of the UAP Disclosure Act, where it stands at the moment, and the attempt to water it down. So that really has been the big story for the week, and I will be coming back to that again and again through this week in review. So here's another story that is based on this tweet by Steve Bassett from the Paradigm Research Group, and he is an activist. He's a lobbyist, UFO disclosure lobbyist. I think the only one in the US Congress or in Washington, D.C. I mean, there may be a second, I believe, someone else registered as a UFO lobbyist. But Steve Bassett, for a couple of decades now, has been the only lobbyist for UFO disclosure in Washington, D.C. And so he is really enjoying this time when all of a sudden the UFO issue has become a hot topic. And now you have various committees in the US Congress and major institutions all paying a lot of attention to UFOs, their national security implications, and how much to disclose to the American people. So Steve Bassett, he's a disclosure advocate and activist, and so he's saying use Twitter to influence the leaders in the armed services committees from both the US Senate and the House of Representatives that are meeting in a reconciliation committee that just has been meeting this week to reconcile the two versions of the National Defense Authorization Act. So Steve Bassett is saying you should tweet the various people. This is the way in which you can lobby congressmen these days. So yeah, so that's a call to just become more active using Twitter. Here's an interview I did with John DeSouza, a 25-year veteran with the FBI as a special agent. And John DeSouza has a first-hand experience with the X-Files within the FBI. I mean, he was the paranormal expert within the FBI, and so his role in the FBI and the X-Files that he examined really were incorporated into the television series, The X-Files, and the movies. So he's written several books. We discussed a couple of those books, The Extra Dimensionals and Clear Hearers, in this interview. And John is a big proponent that all extraterrestrials are really extra-dimensional beings, a kind of version or variation on Jacques Vallée, who's been arguing that for several decades. I think Passport to Magonia, I think that was a book he wrote where he really first put out this idea that no, all extraterrestrials that we think are physical material beings in these spacecraft flying around the galaxy and visiting our world, well, in fact, these are interdimensionals. So John DeSouza kind of like gives a variation on that, and I think he's both. He's got part of the truth there. I think there are genuinely extra dimensionals or interdimensionals that are interacting with our world, but I think we also have physical beings, and these beings are the ones that ride around in the ships, and that. But I think it's good to have an open mind to explore this phenomenon, because the bottom line is that we shouldn't assume that things are as they appear to be. I think that's the bigger point that John DeSouza is trying to make here. And he also discusses the efforts of the cabal, the deep state, to bring about a third world war, and how the Ukraine and the Israel-Palestine conflicts are just parts of this nefarious plan to bring about a third world war. And he thinks that this is all going to escalate as a result of what he predicts, and a few others are predicted to be coordinated terrorist attacks on 17 US cities that will then be blamed on Iraq to trigger a US military attack in World War III. So, I mean, that's a very scary possibility, and hopefully that does not happen. But being a former special agent with the FBI who is monitoring global events and US national events, we need to be aware of the possibility of this happening. And a lot of others are saying it's likely to happen. And I think it's very plausible that the deep state could do this. I mean, we know that 9/11 was a coordinated series of attacks. So rather than just attacking 2 cities, now there would be 17 cities. And John DeSouza said that these attacks will likely be on infrastructure. Now, that would obviously minimize casualties, physical casualties and deaths, but the attack on multiple US cities by these terrorists that could be or may be well linked to these illegal immigrants who have come into the country without any screening at all, that's all being allowed to happen by the deep state because their plan is to blame Iran. And that would then give the pretext for the US attacking Iran, which in turn would trigger a regional war that could then suck in other major powers like Russia and China. And so then we'd be in a third world war. So a very scary possibility. So well worth watching that particular interview with John DeSouza. Okay, so here is something that Elena Danaan posted, and she is a contactee, and she, to my mind, is probably the most corroborated contactee out there. There's a lot of contactees out in the public arena. A lot of people claiming that, I've had contact and experiences with this extraterrestrial being and that extraterrestrial being. Elena Danaan, as far as I can tell today, has the most corroboration for what she has seen and experienced. And that comes from independent witnesses or other individuals who have interacted with the same beings or even had been taken to different locations where contact with extraterrestrials or where there was contact with, say, space arcs have occurred. So she is in contact with one of the Anunnaki leaders, that is Prince Ea or Enki. And there has been some debate about, well, is Enki a good guy or a bad guy? I mean, if we're going to be discerning when it comes to the Anunnaki, I think it's foolish to think that the Anunnaki should be viewed as either entirely positive or entirely negative. I mean, some people do make the case one way or the other. I think the Anunnaki, just like humans, you have different factions. Some are very loving, very empathic, and others are very much oriented to power and control and quite ruthless. So where does Prince Ea fit in or Enki fit in? So what Elena did was she posted a passage from the Atra Hasis, which is a 4,000-year-old text. It is an Akkadian text, and it describes Prince Ea as someone that was really concerned about the welfare of humanity. That Ea was someone that wanted humanity to prosper and really gave them advice on how to do that. So in this passage, she describes how Ea was helping humanity get over this terrible famine that was afflicting humanity before the Great Flood. This was one of the artifacts, or one of the tools that was used by Enki's half-brother Enlil to bring about the demise of humanity. So Enki helped humanity get through that crisis. So that passage, the Atra Hasis, goes into detail about this. So Elena Danaan also does a weekly Star Nations news that gives an update on what visiting extraterrestrials are doing in our solar system. So as I said, her information is the most corroborated of all individuals claiming to be in contact with extraterrestrials. And some of you might say, well, why should we care? Why should we pay any notice to what Elena Danaan thinks is happening in our solar system or other solar systems? And the reason I think we should take notice is that according to one of the sources that has corroborated Elena Danaan's information, this is Dave Rossi, who has his own website, Generation Z. He has spoken with high-level insiders, and we're talking people at the level of Hal Puthoff and Soul Foundation, people at that level, that they watch Elena Danan's updates. They do not watch other people's updates, and they watch her updates because their information is that she is the real deal. So that's why it's worth paying attention to this Star Nations news. I mean, I'm sure a lot of you maybe are going to be pretty skeptical of, well, is this really happening in the Alpha Centauri star system? I mean, is there truly a civilization in the Alcyon star system, and that this has just happened there, that Leonard Danan's information about these events, and also the hub? This is a very large space base being built above Jupiter. Is that really happening? As I said, she is well corroborated, and we know from some credible sources that high-level insiders watch her information, listen to her podcast, because they view her as being the most credible of all the contactees at the moment. And that is very important. To me, I would say to anyone that wants to understand the big picture concerning UFOs, if you just rely on FOIA acts, FOIA information acts, or what governments release to the public through these various committees, you're just scratching the surface. If you start listening to whistleblowers, if you start listening to the testimonies of insiders who have worked in special access programs, you are going to a deeper level. And that I think is very important. But if you want to understand what the extraterrestrials are doing, and you're not going to get that from FOIA information, you're not going to get that from insiders and whistleblowers, you're going to get that from contactees. So that's why I say to anyone that wants to understand exopolitics, you got to pay attention to the contactees. Even if you don't believe everything that is said, pay attention. And of all the contactees, Elena Danan is, to my mind, the best of the best at the moment. And I would pay attention to her. There are others that I can recommend: Jean-Charles Moyen, Alex Collier, even JP, the US Army insider that I've been working with for 15 years now. These are all very credible sources, and they do corroborate Elena's information. Okay, so here's a tweet from Mike at Disclosure. Breaking news: Congress is currently rewriting the Schumer Amendment to remove the eminent domain clause and exempting certain active special access programs from the FOIA process. Okay, so this is very disturbing, because if the UAP Disclosure Act was rewritten with the removal of the eminent domain and the exempting of a category of special access programs from disclosure, this would really defang the UAP Disclosure Act. Companies such as, say, Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, who were given decades ago the debris from UFO crashes, and that they've been studying and reverse engineering those, and according to my sources, successfully reverse engineering those. That's important, successfully reverse engineering these recovered UFO debris going back decades. And that's very different to the information we are getting from people like David Grush and Bob Lazar, Michael Schellenberger, who say that, yes, these craft have been recovered. Yes, they are being studied in classified corporate facilities, but unfortunately, none of them have been successfully reverse engineered. That's not true, not accurate. But that's the narrative that is being pushed at the moment, and fair enough. That opens the door. I bless them for opening the door. But once the door's open, there's a 800-pound gorilla behind there, and that 800-pound gorilla is the secret space programs. So anyway, so here we have an attempt to remove a category of special access programs from disclosure, and removing eminent domain. So therefore, the aerospace corporations would not be compelled by the review board that is created by the UAP Disclosure Act to release or to spill the beans on all the technology they have and the debris that they have. They wouldn't be compelled to surrender that to the government. And that would be a similar situation to what Rear Admiral Thomas Wilson encountered in 1997 when he was the Deputy Director of the Defense Intelligence Agency and also the Deputy Director of J2 within the Chief of Staff of the Pentagon, that he was denied access by corporate attorneys for to special access program that was dealing with recovered UFO debris. He was denied access. So that would repeat itself. If the UAP Disclosure Act has the removal of eminent domain and exempted a certain category of SAPs, you can imagine, somewhere down the track that this review board that will be set up and will report directly to the president, that they find out that, there's a certain corporation like Skunk Works or Phantom Works with Boeing. They have some crashed UFO debris. We want to know all about that. And that corporation, Lockheed, says no, and we're not going to hand it over. And so that would be what happens if the UAP Disclosure Act is defanged in this way. Here's a tweet to an article, an opinion piece by a retired US Navy Rear Admiral who wrote about the need for UFO transparency. He endorses the Sol Foundation and Galileo Project's scientific approach to understanding the phenomenon. Well, this is the problem here with those advocating a scientific approach. I think it's a great thing that this retired Rear Admiral is speaking about the need for UFO transparency, and he's supporting organizations like the Sol Foundation, which does talk about recovered spacecraft being secretly studied in various corporate facilities. The Galileo Project is really focusing on what telescopes and kind of like rigorous calibrated instruments, scientific instruments are telling us about UFOs. That is a much more limited approach in my understanding, but both of them are advocating this scientific approach, which is to say that to understand the UFO phenomenon, we need to use the methodologies of science. Well, the problem is that the UFO issue from the very beginning very quickly became much more than a scientific problem. It became a political and national security problem because it was worked out very early on that these craft were being piloted by extraterrestrials. And so, rather than take the scientific approach, which is, let's use our instruments, our well-calibrated instruments to track these UFOs, to see how they behave, to see whether or not they defy the laws of physics and where these might be built or where they might derive from, that we need to go to key questions such as, when did this cover-up begin that these craft were extraterrestrial? Or who is behind it? Which extraterrestrials built those craft? Which extraterrestrials are making contact? Which of these craft have been reverse engineered successfully, and so forth? So this is a step in the right direction by this Admiral Gallaudet, but it is nevertheless just one step in the right direction, but it's a small step. We need to go beyond this idea that understanding UFOs requires just a rigorous scientific process. I don't dispute that scientists will want to do that, and that's fine. Please go ahead and do that. But do not ignore the exopolitical or national security approach, because there is compelling evidence that from the very beginning in the 1940s and 1950s, that UFOs became a national security issue, and therefore we need to use the tools of political science to understand what's going on. And political science looks at people. It looks at the motivations of people, looks at the agendas of people. It categorizes institutions and organizations. These are things that go beyond the natural scientific method, which is just looking, pointing a telescope, pointing a camera, taking measurements. Fine. But, if you're looking at people, institutions, global processes, these are political, national security issues. All right, so let's go on. Okay, so this is a really fascinating article in the Daily Mail. It describes the CIA being involved for decades in UFO crash retrieval operations. So here's the article. So let's go there. Exclusive. CIA's secret office has conducted UFO retrieval missions on at least 9 crash sites around the world, whistleblowers reveal. So this refers to this Office of Global Access, a wing of the CIA that has been collecting data on alien spacecraft since 2003. So this is very interesting that this article was published in Britain's Daily Mail. It is a very major news or tabloid in Britain, and so you're talking about millions of Britons suddenly being told that UFOs are crashing and that the CIA have been retrieving those craft going back many, many decades, and that the organization responsible for that, the Office of Global Access, has been doing this since 2003. Well, I know that the CIA has been involved in UFO crash retrieval operations going back many, many decades. We have Clifford Stone, a 22-year U.S. Army veteran who was involved in approximately, I think it was close to 24 UFO crash retrieval operations during his 22-year career. And his handler was a high-level CIA official who had a kind of unofficial rank of colonel. He called him the colonel, but it was very clear that this was a CIA official, that the CIA was involved in this. And it's also very significant because in my own research, when I looked at the President Kennedy assassination, it was very clear that the organization that he first approached or first sent a letter to, well, he issued a directive to the CIA director, Alan Dulles, in June of 1961, and the letter was phrased in the language of the day, and effectively what it was telling Alan Dulles to reveal all he knew about UFOs. The code for UFOs at that time was psychological warfare operations. That was the organization created within the national security system to deal with UFOs. That there was a program dealing with these Cold War psychological operations, but that was the cover for dealing with UFOs and this organization called Majestic 12. And Alan Dulles was the director of the CIA, but also he was, in his capacity as CIA director, MJ1. So in his responsibilities as MJ1, he drafted 8 directives that were designed to stifle Kennedy's efforts and ultimately tied to his assassination. So the CIA has been involved in classified UFO operations going back to the 1940s and was particularly active during the Kennedy administration in first denying access to classified UFO files. I mean, that's the important thing to keep in mind. Project Blue Book always dealt with unclassified UFO files that were released to the public, but the classified UFO files didn't go to the Air Force, or, well, the Air Force would collect those files and then they would be funneled off to the CIA that would deal with what's going on. And that's a very kind of clear process. that was going on. So the CIA has been involved in this. So the Britain's Daily Mail is revealing this. So to my mind, this is just more evidence that the public is being fast-tracked or being prepared for major revelations about the existence and the reality of UFOs, and they being extraterrestrial in origin. That is coming. And how long we're going to wait, I don't think it's going to be very long now at all. I think this UAP Disclosure Act is going to be the thing that tips the scales, but we're still waiting for its passage, and we will be talking about that. Well, here's Tucker Carlson, and here he interviews Congressman Tim Burchett, who is very vocal in his criticism of those elements within the US government that are hiding the existence of UFOs. Tim Burchett has heard a number of whistleblowers, people like David Grush, who have revealed their involvement in crash retrieval operations and that these involve non-human intelligence or extraterrestrials. So Tim Burchett, based on credible whistleblower testimony that he has heard, is convinced that there's a massive cover-up that's going on. It's been going on for decades, and he wants the truth to come out. So he's using his power as a representative of the US Congress to bring the truth out. So here he appears on Tucker Carlson, and Tucker Carlson gives Tim Burchett a platform, a major platform, to share what he knows about this. So again, this is just more evidence that we are, the American public and the world publics are being prepared for major disclosures concerning the existence of extraterrestrial life and they being behind UFOs, and that some of these are being reverse engineered, or at least studied in reverse engineering programs. Okay, so I did a short interview with Clayton Morris from Redacted about the recent pushback against the UAP Disclosure Act and how it's connected to aerospace corporations and political payback. That, you know, there's a couple of motivations for why these various members of the US Congress, who the heads of the House Intelligence and Armed Services Committees, are trying to water down the UAP Disclosure Act. It's not just a matter that, it's not just a question of them being opposed to this act because they are beholden to corporate lobbyists with the aerospace industry, but it's also some bad blood between these people like Mike Rogers from the House, who's the head of the House's Armed Services Committee, who very much resent people that are in the UAP caucus, such as Matt Gaetz and Tim Burchett, who were instrumental in the removal of Speaker Kevin McCarthy. So I think there's some political payback that's going on here, but it's also corporate lobbyists that want to water this down. And after I did the interview, I realized that, you know, there's some oversight here on my part, that what I really should have mentioned was that, well, if you're Lockheed Martin, if you are Northrop Grumman and you have your hands on these recovered UFO debris and you've been studying this for decades and you've been using that technology for reverse engineering projects, and you've been using some of that technology in some of your advanced fighters or missiles and so forth, the last thing you want to do is to have other corporations having access to that technology, which is why there is this pushback to remove eminent domain. Because if you think about it, a company like a new kid on the block like SpaceX or Blue Origin with Jeff Bezos, these are relatively new parties to the aerospace industry, but they have a lot of wealth behind them and powerful pioneers or creators, founders behind them, people like Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk. And these guys are innovators. And so if they get their hands on this technology, they will be much more innovative and much more cost efficient. You look at SpaceX, what it did for conventional rocket propulsion. So you can imagine if SpaceX gets its hands on some of these crashed UFO debris and that operate on, say, exotic propulsion systems and energy systems, whatever Lockheed Martin and whatever Northrop Grumman have been doing for decades, SpaceX will be able to do it at a fraction of the time, at a fraction of the cost. So to my mind, this is probably why these aerospace corporations do not want eminent domain within the UAP Disclosure Act. Okay, so here you have a major newspaper in the Washington, D.C. area, The Hill, that covers actions in Congress, and a journalist, Mark Rennenkampf, calls out, actually names the 4 Republicans that are opposing the passage of the UAP Disclosure Act. And he makes a case for why the Act's present effort to create a controlled disclosure process using this creation of a review board and eminent domain and subpoena power, that is a controlled disclosure process, that's far better than an uncontrolled or catastrophic disclosure process whereby the UAP Disclosure Act is gutted, it's neutralized, it doesn't work. And then what will happen instead is that you're going to have a lot of insiders coming forward, and of course the possibility that UFOs suddenly show up. These extraterrestrial motherships suddenly show up. I've been saying for a couple of years now, according to the information I've been getting from different sources, JP, the Army insider, that these space arcs are going to show up. They are going to do it. And also these motherships belonging to these cedar races that have arrived in our solar system are also going to start revealing themselves. So in a way, what we are witnessing right now is the US government is trying to get ahead of something big that is coming that they cannot control, which is why they are educating the public about UFOs, which is why the UAP Disclosure Act is being fast-tracked into law. And the effort to dilute it, if that happens, it's not going to delay the inevitable. But if you do have the Act's passage, then the extraterrestrials that are monitoring human affairs, because this is the thing, extraterrestrials monitor human affairs, and they don't necessarily look at what these members of Congress or elected representatives are thinking and doing. They look at the consciousness of the planet, and they look at the consciousness of the planet, and they say, the people of Earth are ready for us to reveal ourselves. And if their politicians and their military leaders aren't ready for that, well, too bad. We are going to do it. So I think they know that the extraterrestrials have a role, and their patience, whatever agreements they have with governments and with militaries, that those agreements are contingent on these governments and military leaders acting responsibly when it comes to educating the public, their constituents, on the reality of UFOs and extraterrestrials. So I think that this is something that is coming, and everything we are witnessing in terms of the passage of the UAP Disclosure Act is really trying to get ahead. It's something that can't be stopped. So here's the Hill article by Mark Rennenkampf, and he names these four Republican leaders, which is very interesting. I mean, that here you have a major newspaper on the Hill identifying people trying to block UFO disclosure, and UFO disclosure is a good thing. So he identifies Representative Mike Turner, the head of the House Intelligence Committee, Representative Mike Rogers, head of the House Armed Services Committee, the Senate Minority Leader, Mitch McConnell, and Speaker of the House, the newly elected Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson. The three Mikes, well, that's unfortunate. They do discredit to the great name of Mike. Mike or Michael. All right, so that's the Hill opinion piece by Mark Rennenkampf. Okay, I did an interview with Deborah Thunderbeat, and she has been a long-time extraterrestrial contactee. She began to work with sound and light activations and earth activations, chakras. She was guided by extraterrestrials, and through her own kind of like abilities, began to use sound for healing and activation. She's had transformative contact experiences with angelic beings and positive extraterrestrials, but also is aware of the negative. She has interacted with these negative beings. She is also part Native American on her mother's side. I think her mother was Native American, and she has worked with tribal elders and visited multiple sacred spots around the planet. She's traveled to Egypt, Mayan pyramids in Central America, and of course Native American artifacts. So she is someone that really does know her stuff. She does have a book out, and she has various CDs. So I think you could buy the CD or the MP3s by visiting her website, which is thunderbeat.com. So definitely someone to pay attention to. And as I said, you want to understand the big picture when it comes to extraterrestrials, start looking at contactees, start looking at people that are credible contactees, who have been around for some time, and what they do can be corroborated to various extents. So I would include Deborah Thunderbeat amongst those credible contactees. So yeah, just listen to that interview and definitely check out her website. Okay, Henry Kissinger. All right, well, there is a very interesting world figure. He passed away on November 29. He made it to 100. He in Australia, the 100 in cricket is celebrated. He reached his ton. It's always something to be celebrated. So Henry Kissinger reached his ton. And speaking about cricket in Australia, Australia won the World Cup in cricket. So that's great. So Australia is now the world champions in one-day cricket. Well, that's good to know. I did watch the highlights of the final. So anyway, so let's get back to Henry Kissinger passing at the age of 100. Now, Henry Kissinger is a really interesting figure. He went back all the way to the Second World War when he was with the U.S. Army's Counterintelligence Corps, seeking out advanced technologies and scientists that the Nazis had. So he was part of Operation Paperclip. He was helping identify the Nazi scientists and technologies that would then be taken back to the United States. So when he came back to the United States, he became an acolyte of Nelson Rockefeller. And Nelson Rockefeller was a national security advisor to President Eisenhower and helped set up the PI-40 Special Studies Group within the National Security Council of the Eisenhower administration. So Henry Kissinger was a key advisor of the cover-up because, I mean, whether you love or hate him, I think a lot of people consider Henry Kissinger a war criminal, and I would not let's just say I would not object to that characterization because of his role in some of these world conflicts. But I don't think it's as black and white as that. I think Kissinger, he did advocate this balance of power system, and there is a place for that. It is if we take an idealistic approach to world conflict, geopolitical conflicts, I think sometimes we can lose sight of the big picture, and we do not want to go overboard. I mean, some people, for example, during the Cold War, some people wanted to go overboard in terms of, well, this is a crusade against the evils of Soviet communism, and we need to do much more to confront Soviet communism. Whereas Kissinger was kind of like advocating a balance of power approach of containment and so forth. So, there is a role to be played for that. So Kissinger was a complex character. I mean, incredibly strategic thinker, but also involved in the UFO cover-up and an advocate for the continued cover-up. So that's where I would, let's just say, disagree with Kissinger and what he did. And I wrote a study paper in 2003. So 20 years ago, I wrote a study paper where I had a section on Kissinger. And this is what I wrote in the section prior to this is what I wrote prior to this section on Kissinger. Quote, there is strong evidence from whistleblower sources that the master strategist of the Special Studies Group that made up the outer layer of MJ-12 PI-40 was a key Rockefeller protege, Dr. Henry Kissinger, whose experience in managing the ET presence went further back than is commonly appreciated. So this is the study paper I wrote, and it's about 14,000 words. It was published on Independence Day 2003. The title was Political Management of the Extraterrestrial Presence, the Challenge to Democracy and Liberty in America. Because I thought back then, and as I think today, that this extraterrestrial cover-up does affect American liberties and the fundamental value of democracy, because the cover-up violates both of those to varying degrees. So, there's the full section I had in a tweet where I described Henry Kissinger. And here I did an article on exopolitics.org. So you can go there, and here's where I just gave a summary of everything I just said, where you could read about Kissinger's role going all the way back to the 1940s during the Second World War, when he was part of U.S. To the Army's Counterintelligence Corps, and him becoming the master strategist for the MJ-12 group and the PI-40 Special Studies Group within the national security system. So that's the section. So this is the section. It's a long section. I go over Kissinger's background, how he strategized, his position, his reasoning on UFOs, and how his realpolitik influenced his position on the UFO cover-up. So well worth reading for those that are not aware of Kissinger's role. So the good news here is that I believe that Kissinger's passing will make it easier to reveal the truth, because people like Kissinger, David Rockefeller, Nelson Rockefeller, many others involved in the UFO cover-up, they have all passed now. They will not be embarrassed. They will not be shamed. They will not be jailed or punished for their role in the cover-up. They're all gone. So all of these people that instituted the cover-up are gone. So the ones that have maintained it, they can just say, well, we were just doing what we were ordered to do, that these were the rules. And so now we're glad that this has all been exposed. So, people that are running these operations today, I think they can make a fair case that they came in young, they came in, achieved these high levels within the system of covering it all up. Kissinger, Rockefellers were all behind this. Now they've passed. Now the truth can be revealed. So fair enough. They were following orders. All right, here we have a clarification on the UAP Disclosure Act by by the UAP caucus. So the UAP caucus, this involves the 6 members, bipartisan members of the House of Representatives, and I believe that they plan to expand it with senators and so forth. And it could have gone already beyond the 6 that initially set it up. But initially, there were 6 members of the UAP caucus that involved people I've already mentioned: Timothy Burchett, Matt Gaetz, Anna Luna, and 3 others. And they are very active, becoming much more active on the promotion of UFO transparency. And so they issued an important clarification regarding the 25-year rule and the review board in the UAP Disclosure Act. Some people were confused. They thought, well, if this UAP Disclosure Act passes, that means we have to wait 25 years for all of this stuff to be revealed. It's like, well, this is the clarification. That they were saying that there are at least 8 alleged UFO crash retrievals that would be immediately declassified if the UAP Disclosure Act, as currently written, becomes law. And what they're saying is that, okay, so these are the 8 acts, or the 8 alleged UFO crash retrievals that would be immediately declassified. So the Cape Girardeau crash from 1941, 1947, Roswell, Aztec, New Mexico, 1948, Kingman, Arizona, 1953, Las Vegas in 1962, Bolivia, 1973, Virginia, Brazil in 1996, Peru in 1997. So what this act does is that it says that all UFO records, once they have been since the establishment of that UFO record, once 25 years has elapsed, it is going to be automatically declassified unless there is compelling national security reasons not to do so. And those compelling reasons have to be spelled out, and the review board has to consider that, and then the president will make a final determination. So this tells us that all historic cases up until 1998, 25 years ago, all records pertaining to those, and those records, they all happened 25 years ago, that they would be immediately declassified. So that's an important clarification. And they go on to clarify that there's a presumption of automatic declassification. So that means, in principle, once any UAP record reaches the 25-year mark, it will be declassified without requiring a specific reapproval process by the review board. So all UAP records before 1998 would carry this presumption on day one of when the UAP Disclosure Act is passed. And as I said, I think this UAP Disclosure Act, it is trying to get ahead of what is coming. And the bottom line here is, and this is important, I think the UAP Disclosure Act is being pushed because those running the UFO projects know that if they don't do this, the extraterrestrials are monitoring everything, and they say, okay, the US government is doing nothing to educate the people. Okay, we'll take it out of their hands and we'll do it ourselves. And here we are. So I think this is one of the reasons why I think the UAP Disclosure Act is being pushed, because the extraterrestrials are leaning on the governments and saying, you got to start revealing the truth here, because if you don't do it, we will. So the UAP Disclosure Act is, in a way, it's like a Hail Mary by the controllers, by the deep state, to keep everything, to control things. Now, that doesn't mean that they can't spin it in a way that will benefit them. And we are seeing that. This is where you get the whole national security threat hype, that narrative being pushed aggressively by various individuals, various people. And that suggests that this could be because this is the alien false flag event is still a card that the deep state is contemplating playing. Doesn't mean that they're going to play it. they are contemplating it. I think they do a cost-benefit analysis, and maybe the benefit of the cost is too high, but they might consider that, well, we will still benefit in some way, even though the cost will be very high in some way. Okay, so here you have a press conference where members of this UAP caucus, also members of the House Oversight Committee, there's overlap there, that they speak out against the continued UFO cover-up. So this press conference goes for 30 minutes. It is well worth watching. You can see that these members of Congress are determined to have UFO disclosure. They want to get to the bottom of it, and I think there is a legitimate degree of outrage that all this information has been kept from the representatives of the United States Congress for decades. I think Tim Burchett, he understands the Constitution, as do all members of the caucus, and they're outraged. And I think they have a right to be, because you look at the Constitution, it is the House of Representatives, it is the Senate. These are the bodies that need to pass the laws governing an issue as momentous as this, rather than these unappointed, also unelected representatives in these hidden committees like PI 40, Majestic 12, whatever National Security Committee that has been set up to deal with the UFO issue, that Burchett and others are outraged that this has been going on for so long, and they want Congress to finally be read in and to start making responsible decisions about this. So I think that's a very good thing. So you can watch that press conference and get a sense of their outrage over this continued secrecy. Okay, so Russell Brand. I mean, so he is bringing up some crucial points about the travesty of turning over recovered UFO debris to major aerospace corporations for classified studies, who then assert proprietary control over reverse engineered products. So, I mean, he's saying, look, the system as it currently exists, and he's saying this is alleged. Okay, so he's not saying, yeah, I'm totally committed that this is what's going on, even though, we know, I'm sure those of you watching this, that this has been going on, that these UFO extraterrestrial spacecraft have crashed, whether it's a result of just natural weather conditions or whether it's because of directed energy weapons that has been happening, that they are crashed, that you have the CIA and the Air Force sending these covert crash retrieval teams all around the world to retrieve these, bring them back to the United States. Typically, they end up first going to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, where the Air Force has a first look. And once the Air Force has had a first look, then they hand it off to the CIA, and the CIA takes it to Area 51 or wherever they have people studying these projects. And the corporations are contractors for the Air Force and the CIA. And so these corporations, whether it's part of a CIA special access program, which actually the CIA, they're called controlled access programs, or whether it's part of an Air Force special access program, you have the same corporations getting their hands, working with the CIA, working with the Air Force or Space Force now. And so those corporations study the debris, they do their reverse engineering, they develop final products, and then they deliver them to the market. And so there have been products that have been delivered to the markets. And so we see this, with Kevlar, fiber optics, night vision goggles, and so forth. These are all resulted from some reverse engineering of extraterrestrial spacecraft that the US Army decided to seed into various corporations. So the corporations working with the CIA and the Air Force in these crash retrieval operations, that they get their hands on these debris, and then they study it and they reverse engineer it. Whatever products are developed, they want to bring those to the market if they're given permission to do so. If it's declassified, then they want to bring those to the market, and they want to incorporate it into their projects. So, you look at, say, the F-22 or the F-35, some series of those that apparently they use some anti-gravitics. The B-2 bomber uses anti-gravitics. So this is all reverse engineered from extraterrestrial spacecraft. So Russell Brand brings up the good point. Well, why is it that some corporations have access to this and they can monopolize this and they can profit from it? And so the point, he brings out the injustice of that in making the point, well, shouldn't this be done for the wider benefit of humanity? That aren't these craft that are retrieved and then studied and reverse engineered? Isn't that something that should be done in a way that benefits all humanity rather than just select corporations? And then the other point that I raised earlier, why should it be just those corporations that the CIA and the Air Force have been working with for decades and turning over these UFO craft debris? Shouldn't it be innovative, cost-effective companies like SpaceX be given access to these things? I mean, if you start turning over some of these crashed UFO debris to Elon Musk and his engineers, I'm sure he'd look at that. He'd look at those things and say, yeah, we can reverse engineer that. I mean, apparently, the narrative that's circulating is that, Lockheed Martin and Northrop Grumman, that these corporations, they've had their hands on these UFOs going back to the 1990s. If you listen to Bob Lazar, or if you listen to Eric Davis, or you listen to David Grush and Michael Schellenberger, these people, they say, these debris have been in the possession of corporations for a long time now, but reverse engineering efforts have failed. Well, isn't that a good reason to turn that debris over to companies like SpaceX that can reverse engineer these things at a fraction of the cost and a fraction of the time? I think that's the kind of bigger point that I think is raised by what Brand is bringing up. But I think it's also very important to just emphasize once again how Russell Brand, I mean, you look at his YouTube channel, I think he's got like 6 million subscribers. There you go, 6.7 million subscribers. So his information gets out to a very wide audience. And this is part of the awakening of humanity. And what happens here, as people like Russell Brand, Tucker Carlson, and many other prominent podcasters put this information out to the general public, is that more and more of humanity awakened to the truth. And as they are awakened, the consciousness, the collective consciousness increases. And as that increases, extraterrestrials monitoring our planet say, oh, the humans are ready. The egg's about to hatch. Let's help it, And those that are trying to stop that process, they're going to have a harder and harder time, because the extraterrestrials that are working with governments and militaries, and there are, I mean, it's very clear that this has been going on for decades, and that's a deeper level of the onion that will be peeled back eventually. The agreements between extraterrestrials and government military officials, eventually that'll come out. But right now it's all about crashed UFOs that are being secretly studied in corporate laboratories, and these are being reverse engineered. That's where the narrative stops at the moment. So some people say it's a limited hangout. It's opening the door, and that's a good thing. Right. So. Okay, well, here's something I announced, that I'm very pleased that I was able to meet with David Adair. And I spent a couple of days with him at his home, and I did interviews with him, 6 hours. I've got him on tape for 6 hours, and I will be releasing that on my Exopolitics Today podcast. So you can look forward to the first interview coming out in a week or two, probably in a couple of weeks, but because he's got a lot of documentation. David, he said that I'm the first person that he has allowed to come to his home and view his documentation. And I looked at hundreds of documents. I took photographs of dozens and dozens of documents. I haven't counted all of the documents that I took photos of, but I have close to 100 documents that I photographed. And so I will be talking about that while we talk about those in the interviews, and I will be releasing those in the interviews. Now, for those of you that don't know about David Adair, his story, very quickly, in 1971, as a 17-year-old, he was taken to Area 51. He was taken to an underground facility there, and he was taken there because there was an extraterrestrial, there was an engine of a large spacecraft that used the principle of electromagnetic fusion containment. So it was an electromagnetic fusion containment reactor. And he was taken there to see this because he had built a smaller version on a rocket that he had developed. So the people running Area 51 thought that he could help them understand the origins and the operations of this spacecraft. So he has talked about that for a couple of decades now. And so in our interviews, you get to hear more about what happened and also more of his life story. So you can look forward to that in the next couple of weeks. Okay, here's another tweet from Steve Bassett, who spoke directly with Congressman Tim Burchett. So this came out on Friday, December 1st. And so he said that, and he clarified, because the Schumer-Rounds assessment, what is widely considered to be the UAP Disclosure Act, which is an amendment that was proposed by Senators Schumer and Brand, that is what is being debated right now in this the joint committee, or this reconciliation committee involving the armed service committees from the House of Representatives and the U.S. Senate, that they are trying to mull, how to reconcile the two versions. That, according to information from Congressman Burchett, that what he proposed in terms of his own amendment to fast track the UFO disclosure process, he's not happy with UFOs that are appearing now, or that they are subject to this 25-year wait. So, so that in his view is a weakness of the UAP Disclosure Act. Say a UFO shows up, say now, the government or the military collects records on that UFO. It could be a mothership, it could be anything. We have to wait 25 years before it gets declassified. So Congressman Burchett, he came up with his own amendment to expedite that declassification process. Rather than waiting 25 years, it should be released as soon as possible. So he proposed an amendment that was not intended to replace the UAP Disclosure Act, but to strengthen it, to be inserted as additional provisions to strengthen that. So this was what Steve Bassett was able to glean from Congressman Burchett, that his act was intended to strengthen it. He does have issues with the Senate bill. I just mentioned one of those issues, and it is a fair disagreement. Now, this is the interesting part, where Burchett says, and this is on Friday, the latest information about the UAP Disclosure Act, and this is coming from a congressman, is that there's an intense effort to change the language of the bill, to water it down. That the sections that are being targeted for being watered down are the Eminent Domain section, the subpoena power of this UAP, and of the UAP. Sorry, the subpoena power that the Act gives to those wanting to get access to UFO records, and the UAP Review Board, that apparently the attempt to rewrite or water down the UAP Act is trying to deal with those three areas. And so this is where there is an attempt to find some compromise. So Burchett and Bassett are saying lobby Congress to get the UAP Act passed as is, and even better, including the Burchett Amendment, which would expedite the disclosure of more recent UFO incidents rather than those that happened 25 years ago or longer. And the press conference on Thursday was an authentic effort to demand an end to the abuse of secrecy. So I already discussed that with you. So Steve Bassett, he is someone that's been doing work on UFO disclosure going back to the 1990s. So he's been around a long time. He is a friend, and we will talk at some point. So, okay, the final announcement, and that is that my November 25 webinar, The Exopolitical State of the Planet, is now available on Vimeo. So for those of you that didn't watch it or didn't want to watch it on Crowdcast for some people is a little convoluted, so they prefer to watch it on other platforms such as Vimeo. And for those that didn't watch it, let me give another plug for this webinar. I think it's a very important webinar because it gives you a big picture perspective of current geopolitical events, what's happening in Ukraine, what's happening in Palestine, Israel, based on extraterrestrials behind the scenes influencing both sides in these armed conflicts or these contrived conflicts. So extraterrestrials have been involved going back centuries or even millennia, and I describe that process and how that pertains to events happening today. And I think this is really where exopolitics makes a great contribution to geopolitics. Remember, I did teach geopolitics. I was a full-time professor, an assistant professor at American University in Washington, D.C., teaching international peace and conflict resolution. So I taught geopolitics, taught international diplomacy, and we looked at the surface actors and looked at the conflict as being a conflict between these different parties, and we often describe them as binary conflicts. So you look at Israel-Palestine, it's a conflict between the Israelis and the Palestinians. It's a binary conflict. That's what international peace and conflict resolution and geopolitics does. It focuses on the key actors, institutions, and processes involved in international conflict. Now, the problem is, what about the hidden actors? What about the third parties behind the scenes? Extraterrestrials behind the scenes that are manipulating both sides in the conflict. That's exopolitics. That's where we get the hidden hand or the third party operating behind the scenes, manipulating both sides in these protracted conflicts. So if you haven't watched it, then I recommend watching The Exopolitical State of the Planet on Vimeo. And so there's the link there. You can just go to exopolitics.org and it'll be in my shop. So that's it for this week, the Week in Review. So again, don't forget to like and subscribe and promote this to your friends. The algorithms do try and hold back the circulation of information such as this. So thank you, and I look forward to seeing you again next week. Aloha.
You have been listening to Exopolitics Today with Dr. Michael Salla. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Join or start a conversation in the comments. Take the time to explore the vast library of best-selling books, webinars, and podcasts by Dr. Salla. Visit exopoliticstoday.com.